I'm going to try to speak without the microphone. If you need me to speak to the microphone, I will. The DSCA has, over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer than that, been very concerned about the issues around homelessness and visitors, tourists, residents, and businesses and merchants downtown. We've been talking about it for a long while, and so recently the DSCA Board of Directors, in its 2017 operations plan, established an ad hoc homeless committee, and everybody took one step backwards and I'm the chair. The purpose of which is to work with the city of Sarasota, the city staff, and the local organizations to support efforts to reduce the impact of homelessness on our population in Sarasota. The committee itself includes residents and merchants, and they have further refined the goals. So tonight's panel discussion is to talk about homelessness from the point of view of what is the good things that are happening downtown. And we're fortunate tonight to have Joe Polzak, Sarasota Police Department attorney. He represents the police department in legal matters and has done a great job. We have Sergeant Schwieterman from the Sarasota Police Department recommending the work that the hot teams do in Sarasota, and he'll be talking to that. The issues at hand for the DSCA are these. Be a conduit for communication of what's happening in Sarasota. There are many within our community right now who have the belief that the city isn't doing anything. The city does nothing. The perception is that the homeless problems are just getting bigger, and the little that the city does only makes it worse. It's ineffective. Residents and businesses, you can pick up the newspaper, there'll be a letter in the editor this week or next week saying essentially that we are frustrated by the lack of progress, and that there is no concerted effort to counter the perceptions that these people are mentioning. When I walk along downtown, and other people, Patrick walks around town, Victor Scully walks around downtown, much more than I do, I ask merchants what's going on, and they're saying, why don't we do something about the homeless? We put plants in planters, which is great, and we love it. And John, I think you've done a great job with the DID and getting the city looking spiffy. But until you do something with the homeless population, Sarasota is going to be known for that before they're known for their plants. So we decided to look at how can we communicate to you and everybody else what's happening in Sarasota, what's good. In fact, I had a question at one time last year. I read the 2016 Sun Coast Partnership for homeless and found out that somewhere in there we placed 112 people in permanent housing. And then I looked at the 2015 one-day count, and it was something like 867. I looked at the one-day count in 2016, and it was still 870 or 67. If we placed 112, what happened? Are we running a Hilton here, where every time we have a vacancy, we call Minneapolis and say, "Hey, send another person down to fill our vacancy"? Why is that? And when you started looking at what was going on, we started to see that the data and the way people report data are so inconsistent and not in alignment with one another that it's almost impossible to take one report and compare it to another. So we're going to try to do that. The other thing, that if people are really upset about what's going on downtown, and they apparently are, then we need to advocate for more enforcement. And that's why I have Joe Polzak here. We have a very good program in Sarasota. It's called Educate, Encourage, and Enforce. And that was really started a little bit more by the Salvation Army and Ethan Purcell, and it was jumped on by a number of us. And doing a pretty good job, especially the hot teams, with educate and encourage. As I understand it, and Sergeant Schwieterman will tell you more, they do that. But then there's the enforcement issue. And how do you enforce what we have on the books with regard to panhandling, camping out, public urination, and those kinds of things? And Joe will speak to that and what the police department is doing. We've got some very good things going on. People nationally are looking at what Joe does. And then, can we evaluate the effectiveness of several efforts that are made by the city? Can we get the data lined up so that when I look at it in 2017, I can compare it to 2016 and say, yeah, we placed 112, and these are the services they got, and I know where they are today. Right now, I'm not sure that of the 112 that got placed last year, we really know where they are. They get into the system and they're successful, and we're also so stressed out that we're not following up with the data and the evidence-based outcomes illustrating what's happening to these people. And then lastly, in talking to the merchants, the economic impact that persons without homes and without services have on downtown businesses. We really, you know, it's like when we talk about, they're not homeless, they're mentally ill. They're not homeless, they're veterans. They're not homeless, they're kids out of education. Well, you know, when a tourist sees a veteran panhandling and they're driving down the street, they don't make a distinction. It's a panhandling vagrant as far as they're concerned. And so we need to try to get to the point where we know who we're talking about and why we're talking about them. The merchants, and I'll give you an example of one merchant gave me. He said, if because some homeless person is digging around in the trash out front of my store, if they're lying on the sidewalk, if they're panhandling my customers, and I lose one sale a day, one sandwich a day at $6, he says, in the course of the year, that's $2,250 off my bottom line. That's how merchants are measuring the homeless problem. They're not measuring it by saying, oh, there were 12 out front yesterday, but there's only 10 out there today. If he's still losing that one sale on a sandwich or losing one sale on a cup of coffee, we've got a homeless problem. So we're going to try to walk through a couple of things that Joe and Sergeant Schwieterman are doing, and give you an opportunity to see that there are some things happening. Joe, I'll try to set you up.
Sounds good. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for coming and giving us the chance to talk about this. I know it's a big subject. I've got a brief PowerPoint I'll go through with Sergeant Schwieterman, and then leave a bunch of time for Q&A at the end, because I'm sure you guys may have questions. Thank you, sir. Apologize, I'm kind of tied to this so I can advance the slides. But again, I'm Joe Polzak. I'm an assistant city attorney and the police legal advisor for SPD. And with me is Sergeant Schwieterman, who's in charge of the SPD hot team, which, as you'll see, is the homeless outreach team. And basically, I just gave you a little overview of what exactly the hot team is and does. I'm going to go through a few elements of our city code that are most applicable, I think, to this discussion. Some of the challenges we've been facing and successes, which I think would be important to know. All right. So when we talk about it's often called the HOT team, which HOT stands for Homeless Outreach Team, so it's kind of a double entendre or something, but it's basically a program that consists of, you know, people always ask, well, what is it exactly? And basically, we've got some key agreements and components to what our HOT program or our HOT teams consist of. So what I'm going to talk about tonight primarily is the police department operating procedure, which everything they do is governed by policy and procedures, of course, because they're run in a very efficient and organized manner. So we're going to talk about that. It's 423 that sets up and runs the procedures of the HOT teams. I'm going to reference the fact that we have an emergency shelter agreement which everyone may or may not know with the Salvation Army. We also have an agreement to grant fund a case manager program with them, and the city has made a commitment to the CTC program, which is Judge Quartermain's mental health diversion. So just in part, that's kind of a bundle of the sticks of the HOT program that give it life. So a homeless outreach team, or a HOT team, basically consists of a police officer and a case manager. As I referenced, we're getting our case managers through the Salvation Army through a grant funding agreement. And then those case managers deploy embedded in our HOT team to perform outreach functions. We started our HOT team in 2014. Again, not many people knew it existed. Our chief of police is very focused on best practices. The delegation visit San Diego, determined the whole homeless outreach team concept really is a best practice, so we brought that back here to Sarasota, and we've expanded and refined it significantly since then. Here's roughly what a homeless outreach team would consist of. So Sergeant Dubador for the police department, 2 case managers, and an individual Mr. Sergeant Schwieterman would know from.
Actually, that's Officer Dubador from the Blue. Sitting next to him is Brian Psalm. He's an outreach person for Jewish Family and Children's Operation Military Assistance, and the other 2 individuals were case managers that work with us.
And as we'll see, it involves a lot of field work. We talk about deploying this team where the homeless actually are so they can conduct the outreach, as would make sense. So they use an all-terrain vehicle often at times. As I mentioned, that's the essence of outreach, is getting out into the field, contacting the homeless where they are to engage them in service-related discussion. So when we talk about services, what the homeless outreach team and what the police department are is a bridge. We're not a provider of social services. We're a bridge to services that exist in the community, most specifically in what's called the continuum of care, which is a HUD-designated, Housing Urban Development federal agency, designated organization of social services in our area. So as I mentioned, set up through police department policy. In this case, 423.37 references what exactly a homeless outreach team is. As mentioned, it's a homeless outreach specialist, which is an officer that's assigned, as in the case of Officer Dubendorf. I promoted him earlier to sergeant. Case manager, sorry. A case manager, and then they work with various community organizations, as we'll see further on. We're going to talk a lot about this. In policy, we've expanded the homeless outreach team concept to what's called the 3 E's, as Peter mentioned, of education, encouragement, and enforcement. So that's what they're going to be tasked with doing. All right, so the educate component is basically what it sounds, educating about the services that are available, about the continuum of care, also about the city code, so that everyone is on notice of what our code prohibits. And they don't, can't later say that they don't know, because we're out there making this function happen. And as Sergeant Schwieterman will hand out later on, we have created and published a homeless resource guide, which is a pretty comprehensive resource listing all of the applicable social services that are available in our area that they can tap into for housing, food, medical, different things, which you'll see when you examine it. It's a brief picture of it. Again, it's an excellent resource, phone numbers, locations, and a good comprehensive listing of social services. The encourage component, we could have the policy references in here. After informing through what we call education, then, this could happen contemporaneously or in a second follow-up encounter, encouraging them to actually partake of these services. Obviously, this is all voluntary, whether or not they choose to do so. But to the extent that we can encourage and help and refer them to services and case management, then that's what the HOT team is doing. Here you see. Yeah, there he is. I had to put him in there, make him famous.
Didn't know they were taking it.
So here he is performing that exact function with the HOT team, educating and encouraging. Enforcement. It's the 30 that often people may not think about or may not realize as an essential component, and even as many of our service providers would indicate, to this kind of program. Because we have to have accountability, we have to have a enforcement, and if somebody isn't voluntarily partaking of all the resources that we're making available, and they're continually violating city code or other criminal code. So we'll come back to that more, but...
What is 3441?
Great question. I've got a few slides on it. That is our city code against outdoor lodging.
Outdoor lodging.
Correct. So for 3441, we have special protections both built into that code section itself, and also, you know, as a best practice and to ensure the constitutionality of it, that for any enforcement of 3441, there has to be available shelter as an alternative. So in other words, we can't have the criminalization of somebody lodging out of doors in what some call a life-sustaining conduct crime without having a viable alternative to engage in as a free choice. So then the rejection of that becomes the criminality. You're rejecting to exercise your life-sustaining conduct in a lawful way and choosing to do it unlawfully in the city of Sarasota.
Can a person be trespassed from the Salvation Army?
A person can be. I'll let Sergeant Schwieterman maybe discuss that a little more. Now, we work with those type of scenarios in terms of, depending on the nature of the trespass, of getting them in for shelter if they need it. I'll let you expand on that maybe.
Yeah, basically if someone's trespassed from the Salvation Army and someone is doing enforcement, the Salvation Army will let them stay there for the night. They will let them speak with the case manager in the morning. Sometimes the trespass may be lifted if they're willing to accept services at that time. A lot of times the people were trespassed from the Salvation Army for either alcoholism, narcotics use, fighting, or causing a disturbance. So it's very easy to lift those kind of trespasses when they're offering those programs inside Salvation, such as Viper or CRP or the housing, they call it Q-Life programs that they have. So they have lifted trespasses before we brought people.
Now, some people, homeless people, they have exhausted their free nights. Can you?
It doesn't cost them a dime when we bring them in. They automatically get 7 days in our bed. They get 3 days of rest. After the third day, they have to meet with the case manager, and on that third day, start working on some type of plan to improve their quality of life. The case managers are set there to help them accomplish their goals that they're trying to do. And Joe might be mad at me for this. A lot of times we have people stay longer than the 7 days. If they're doing everything they're supposed to do, I'm not going to put them into the emergency shelter or tell them they have to go. If they're doing what they need to do, we want them to be successful.
So part of the reason the city reserved emergency shelter beds at the Salvation Army is to ensure their availability for enforcement activity under city policy. So plus they're a higher quality of shelter than what is the general entry shelter at the Salvation Army. We have a separate dorm with actual beds and an actual room that the city shelter beds are in, rather than just general floor.
And you should also know that they're not like put out in the morning. They can be there 24/7.
Exactly. Another extremely important component is that in the general entry section, they were woken at, I think, 4 or 4:30 in the morning because where they were sleeping was in the cafeteria. So it had to be woken up to make room for breakfast. Our beds that the city has reserved, they have 24 hours of dedicated availability, and they're not woken up like that. And it's a more substantial bed. It's a private dorm facility. So, and that's, both a best practice and also to ensure the constitutionality of this, that they do have a viable shelter alternative. It's not sleeping on the floor. They're not woken up at 4 a.m. It's not on a flimsy little mat. It's not on something that would be considered cruel and unusual. It's an actual bed in a dorm in a shelter facility that's recognized by the federal government. And they're served meals and given an opportunity for a 24-hour stay at minimum. So then it's the rejection of that becomes criminal.
Let me just interject for a minute. I failed, my fault, I failed. we're going to do the presentation. We've left time for questions at the end. So what you don't know is that I've set my computer program, just like Mission Impossible, and that slide destroyed. Let Sergeant Schwieterman talk, and then we'll take the questions. Thank you.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. All right, so we'll go quickly through the city code as we'll get to the lodging ordinance, but briefly I threw this in here. We passed section 2144 of the creating in the city code. Basically, it prohibits the storage, the unlawful storage of personal property on public property, among other things. And this is to address the problem of people literally storing their property on our sidewalks and in our public spaces. Because of the health and safety hazards that presents access concerns under the American with Disabilities Act, among numbers of other things. This ordinance was based off of a couple different ordinances, one that was upheld as constitutional after doing a national search for models for this kind of ordinance. I think it's done very well. I'll let Sergeant Schwieterman address, but there's a few provisions to it. One is normally there's notice required where the property has to be tagged and then given notice before removal. The other way is public notice through posting these signs in locations in the city, putting anyone on notice that they can't store their property on our public property. I think if you
mainly see these signs around City Hall and over around the Salvation Army. The Resurrection House provides storage for individuals. I'm not sure, someone said Tammy's House is doing that now, and the Salvation Army has beds there where they're allowing people to store their property in there as well.
It's been a very effective tool, and it makes sense, again, from a health, safety, and access standpoint, that we can have personal property stored in our public spaces. All right, so back to 3441 again, which is prohibiting lodging outdoors. So it's public or private property unless they have the permission of the property. It's a depiction of some of the scenarios encountered by law enforcement. For those who haven't seen these kind of scenarios, this is the type of situation really this is addressing. Obviously, it's presenting I'll let Sergeant Schwieterman add on, but a public safety and health problem among other problems.
Talk about it?
Yeah.
Basically, this picture was taken of the camp over by Esmond Stadium. What you don't see is the private residence, probably about 50 feet away from that camp. One of the houses got infested with rats, and the rats were coming from the camp. They did not know what field hygiene was, and they were just stacking their garbage up in the woodline, which was bringing the vermin in, and the vermin went into the regular homes. We worked with these people for about a month. There was almost 40 people out at this campsite. It was a multitude of camps. I think one person actually came in for the services. And everyone else eventually was trespassed from the property.
All right, so contrary to what some people would assert, sleeping outside in the city is not prohibited. We're not so mean as to ban sleeping in the city. What's banned is lodging out of doors. That's much different than sleeping. There's several indicia built into the ordinance that place much more stringent requirements on it. So it has to be for living accommodation purposes, and that's evidenced by the use of a temporary shelter, as you saw in the previous picture. For sleeping purposes, often the presence of bedding, and then one or more of the following 5 elements have to be present. Personal belongings present. Cooking activities, maintaining of a fire, earth-breaking activities, or them sleeping or indicating they have nowhere else to go, thus indicating lodging, encampment. Not just sleeping, not somebody taking a nap on our park bench. This is actually setting up an encampment or lodging within our city. Outdoors. So again, when we have probable cause that such a violation has occurred, again, keep in mind, we're more often, as the sergeant will address too, educating and encouraging prior to enforcement, unless it's an exigent scenario. So we're notifying them of the prohibition, we're notifying them of the resources that are available, we're encouraging them to partake of those resources and not engage in unlawful behavior. And then, you know, after those have failed or are not appropriate, we're enforcing. But when we enforce, they have to be given the opportunity to partake of available shelter. So, wanted to throw this up real quick. Basically, this is Annex B to our policy 423, and it's operational in the sense of it indicates a priority of action that I'm going to talk about, but it's also a nice visual because it indicates the flow of how this actually works. So I know you guys can't read this, but just so you can see the flow is why I put it up here.
Where's Sergeant Schwieterman in that? Where's Schwieterman?
He's all over that. Yeah.
And I'll make it easy. From now on, just call me Richie.
Okay.
Sergeant Schwieterman is just too long, so Richie's a whole lot easier.
Yeah. So the yellow basically is indicating our educate and encourage activity. Our green is indicating referral to services. Blue is actual enforcement, the 30 activity. Red being a criminal justice outcome. So what should be readily apparent from the flow chart is that of all the outcomes, there's only one single outcome that results in a criminal justice outcome. And that's the outcome where they've been educated and encouraged, offered available shelter, rejected that shelter, and then end up in enforcement activity in the court system. Every other outcome that they have an opportunity to be referred to services. Family members, health department, hospital, Baker enlargement if that's appropriate. They have the opportunity to be referred to available shelter at our beds that we've reserved specifically by the city of Sarasota that will always be available. If they're not, the ordinance will not be enforced. Or in certain circumstances, we have alternate shelter available. In the case of specialized circumstances, they may go somewhere other than Salvation Army. So it's only the rejection of all of that that ends up in a criminal justice outcome. Even then, they have an opportunity for diversion in the Judge Porter Maine CTC diversion program, which the city is committing to and supporting. So I just want to throw that up there to emphasize that fact. We are not the meanest city. We are not criminalizing homelessness or life-sustaining conduct. What we're criminalizing is the choice to engage in unlawful behavior after being presented with viable, free alternatives. Our challenges. This is not a city of Sarasota problem, it's a national problem. It's a state problem, national problem, and it's landed in our lap, right? We're a Sunbelt city. The numbers are staggering. We have a large influx that come to the city each year. I don't know if you want to comment on.
I'll let you keep going.
Okay, I'm on a roll. So, obviously, we know how that problem plays out. These are not safe conditions. These are not healthy conditions for anybody, especially for them. This was taken in our city. Again, that's not safe or healthy for anyone involved.
That was actually a close-up view of the other camp that you saw. That was part of that.
All right, another challenge that we like to call the fourth E, which is not in policy. And that fourth E is enablement. And enablement can be a dangerous thing when it perpetuates the public safety and health risks that we talk about. So that's one of the challenges we're looking at addressing in the future is how can we channel charitable giving and well-intentioned provision of resources into sustainable, positive outcomes rather than ones that enable the homelessness to continue. I mean, it should be measured by the outcome of ending the person's experience of homelessness, not perpetuating and enabling it. That's one of the things we want to reach out to the community about. Again, there's a national movement along those lines, talking about best practices. That is exactly that, a hand up, not a handout. There's all kinds of government-community interaction on this front to engage the resources of the private community to become involved in the handout process rather than just a handout. Successes. I think it's important to close on this note. Last year, Sergeant Schwieterman's team conducted 11,370 contacts. 11,000. It's absolutely amazing. He's done a fantastic job. 64 individuals went home since October 2015. The city has a Homeward Bound program that provides a free ground transportation to a confirmed family member or friend, which we do confirm that they have a family or friend to go to, or a job or something viable. They could partake of this resource. 692 have accepted entry into the city shelter beds since October 2015. It's a significant number that have a viable shot at resources, at shelter, at ending the cycle of homelessness. Approximately 60% of those shelter bed entrants have accepted secondary social services. That is an amazing success number. I credit that to Sergeant Schwieterman and his team to have that kind of success off of this kind of general triaging, I think is amazing and statistically would bear out to be so. Because Sergeant Schwieterman will maybe address it in his component, but he'll talk about the social services that this is referencing, and they're great programs. So, one thing, as their lawyer, I have to comment that SPD being tasked with this is a almost unprecedented thing in the history of law enforcement. Law enforcement, right? They're designed to enforce the criminal code. What I've just talked about is social services that they're being asked to do. And they're doing an amazing job when it's not really something that traditionally law enforcement hasn't been involved in. But that's the transformation that's taking place nationwide, because they're an effective, powerful force to bring these resources to bear. There they are doing their thing. I don't know if you want to comment quickly on that picture.
It's very short.
Speaks for itself.
I'll actually answer that later on.
But it's a law enforcement officer and a case manager doing the education and encouragement. Again, are we the meanest city? So, again, our goals are to, as we often say, we can't solve homelessness, but we can use the best practices available to serve and protect our entire community, including the homeless, and bring the resources we can to bear on this national issue. What is also a best practice is engagement with the community. As I mentioned, how can we collaborate on the mission, the architecture that I talked about, and the operations of our homeless outreach. Sergeant Schwieterman will talk about some of the community partners that we continually engage with, but we invite anyone and everyone here to engage us in that effort as we seek to expand it into the new avenues that we're looking into. Questions? Maybe I'll, if you guys want to do Sergeant Schwieterman first, and then we'll address questions.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Richard, 692 accepted entry to Salvation Army. Are there any repeats there, or the different people?
There are some repeats in that. You have to remember when someone comes in, I don't expect them to be successful on their first try. If they were, that would be phenomenal, but that doesn't happen. So some of those are repeat people that have come in. Sure.
Question, then a quick follow-up. What percentage would you say of the vagrants, because we're deliberately, are mentally ill, irresolute substance abusers, as distinguished from people just temporarily down in their life, what I call homeless?
Well, there's two types of homeless people that we run into. There's chronic homeless, those who have been homeless 3 or more times within the last year, or you have those situational, which fell on hard times. The situational homeless are not very hard to help because they don't want to be homeless very long. They want to get on their feet, they want to get a job, they want to get back in the house and reconnect with family or whatever it is that they might have lost during their short stint of being homeless. The chronics, I would say, make up about 15% of the population in Sarasota. And
The whole population?
Of the whole population. There's not a lot of chronics, but those are the ones you always see because they congregate in a group. Why do they congregate in that group? Because that is their social network. And that's the group that you're going to see mostly.
Of the homeless people, about 15% are the people with the mental and abuse problem.
No, I'm saying those are the ones you see all the time. Mental and abuse, unfortunately, I'm going to say that's the large majority of everyone in the
That's right.
homeless population.
Okay, so let me just ask you this. I've been in Sarasota for a while. This has been a problem for a long time. And a lot of people are getting just frustrated,
Yeah.
despite the hard, good work you do, that you both do, in terms of combating this problem, to see the vagrants continue to honestly blight the community. And so that frustration is very real, and with merchants more than anybody else, but others as well. Some of the condominium owners that have to live in close proximity to this. Shouldn't there be a solution that is a solution that actually solves homelessness, which was disavowed as a goal? Institutionalization. You know, go back to the way it was before. If people can't conduct themselves in society in a manner that is acceptable and are going to engage in this kind of behavior, the public urination, everything else, institutionalize and give them the help that they need to the extent that it can be provided, and recognizing that there's just some hard cases that aren't going to be solved. Why does the community do that and solve these problems?
Because it's bigger than our community, and I'm going to stand up so I can do better when I walk around. First of all, we live in paradise. In Sarasota, unlike most communities, we have an abundance of resources. And with those abundance, we have people from all over the nation who are homeless who come to our city. When I did outreach on Tuesday, I met two gentlemen who I'd never met before. One had just got out of prison, got a bus ticket to Sarasota because he heard of all of our available services. I met another gentleman who was from Pinellas and came down from Pinellas because he couldn't get services up there. So people are coming here because they hear about what we're doing. They hear about all the wonderful things that we're doing. These two gentlemen, I offered them bus tickets back to family. The one actually showed up this morning, got in the bed, and should be out by next week. And we're trying to get him into an alcohol treatment program back in Pinellas County where he came from. So, are we going to solve this problem in Sarasota? No, because we can't build a brick wall to keep people out. They're going to come here.
You can build an institution and require that they stay there.
But here's the problem. Well, no,
I'm serious. I'm very serious.
Most of the issues we're dealing with are quality of life issues. They're not murderers. They're not, hardened where they're moving, tons of cocaine. These are people who have mental issues or addictions that, unfortunately, we are last in mental health funding our state. So when you talk about building an institution to put them in, that's not criminalization, that's a legislative issue.
Why can't the city come up with it? Wouldn't people pay a nominal additional ad valorem tax in order to house the homeless in facilities where they can be supervised, help to the extent they can,
I just have a question.
control?
Where would you put that institution?
I realize that's a challenge. I realize that's a challenge. I'm not saying in existing neighborhoods, places can be found. If that's the only
But
challenge.
here's the thing. Now you go to another service that's going to be announced throughout the entire state.
People don't want to be locked up.
No, they don't want to be locked up, but other cities, other city commissions, other city residents, they have the same issue we have. They don't want their homeless there. So what are they going to do? I met a gentleman who got shipped here from Naples, actually drove up here from a mental health facility, dropped off at the Salvation Army, knows nothing about Sarasota, just knew that we had one of the best Salvation Armies, and he was dropped off
They're
here.
being coddled.
Dan,
They're being
hold on.
Free food, free places to live.
Hold
and
on a minute,
Come
Tim.
and go and get their drugs and
Right.
come back.
Dan, we have a model, wait a minute. We have a model that's starting to be implemented, and it's going to take dollars. And it's called the
Housing
affordable
first.
Housing.
It's housing first.
That's too expensive.
It's a national model. It's working in some places, not so well in others.
Yeah.
Last week there was an article in Seattle, in the Seattle newspaper, about what they're doing. They're starting a hot team this week. They're starting a hot team this week. They are looking at how they're going to raise the tax rate enough so that there's $126 on the median price of the property tax to go into a housing
So you give them a free house, that's going to solve the problem?
No, it's not a free house. See, that's what people jump to. It's free, it's a place, the reason the person is homeless, they don't have a home, right?
No, it's because they have serious problems.
Right, so what you do is you provide...
Gabriel, there was a reason
Hold on,
that
wait a minute. We're not gonna get into it.
These are valid questions.
Audience
that you
discussion.
have. But unfortunately, in law enforcement, I'm not going to be able to answer all these questions for you because it's got to go to legislative.
Let me tell you what Captain Stiff
For
goes.
the city commission.
We are really, really good at enforcement. We are really good. We're a paramilitary force. You guys want us to be social workers. We're going to try to do some of that, but we're really good at educating, encouraging, and
It's
enforcing.
not solving the problem.
And when you put a person in housing, you put them in, not just drop them off and say, okay, now you got a house. You do the wraparound services with them, the social worker, the
all
mental health
sounds great,
provision,
it's not solving the
and it
problem.
works. It works. We did it with institutionalized people in the 80s and 90s.
Let's move on,
and we can do it
because he's
again.
not gonna-
All right,
That's
so,
fine.
Okay.
Next question.
Portland, Oregon has a public toilet. People there was an article in the paper, they saw human feces on the street. They see public urination. Where does a person without a home go for essential services?
We've had that.
During the daytime, you have the library, you have city hall, you have the state bus
That's, you know,
station.
people come down, oh, you know about the bus station and that.
It's all open. As long as they're not committing an illegal crime, taking up.
But Portland, Oregon has this public restroom, which if we could bring it here, it has all the latest bells and whistles. You know. I mean,
In my
for
question,
after hours.
for after hours, once again, that would be another issue that it's not the police department is going to bring up. Okay, we're just trying to manage the problem. We're not going to solve it.
But I've heard
Okay,
public
should solve.
urination.
Well, you
Okay.
can, but the city commission can, if they have the guts to do what's needed.
Once again, this is a multifaceted social economic issue that's not going to be solved just by the city of Sarasota. And here's my example. Broward County has 5 shelters. Every time they build a shelter, they get more homeless people that show up
I'm not
there.
talking about just a shelter, I'm talking about institutionalization.
Even in
There's such a thing as a
institutionalization,
constitution, for God's sake.
you're still going to have the issue of people being shipped here. The guy who got out of prison got shipped here.
I don't think
He's
people are going
not
to
part of
choose to come here to go to an institution.
I'm going to tell you, they might not choose to come here, but someone will send them here if they think the services are here, they're going to help.
what Sergeant Schwieterman and Joe Polzak, Mr. Polzak, have agreed to do is stick around for a little while.
Yeah.
And they will answer these kinds of questions. Dan, you're always welcome to send me an email and get on our homeless committee. I'd like to have you on our homeless committee if you will. And we have a commissioner and a commissioner candidate here, and they've heard your comments, so I'm sure that it's resonating with them. We have another planning board member here, now Chris Gallagher, and he lives with the homeless up in his area. I hear about it from him frequently, and so forth. We got a problem, but we got solutions, and there are good things happening. Just as you saw here, there are good things.
She did have a, Mr.
Had a speaker one day and I had our condo on homelessness. And he made a statement that I found, I couldn't really decide whether or not I believed it. It was that the police in Naples brought their homeless people out to Sarasota.
Well, that's what Dr. Washington called it.
I didn't hear what you said, I'm sorry.
Naples.
Oh, Naples,
They're
yeah.
sending them out to us.
We're getting them from all across the state, all across the country. We're winding up with homeless people here that are not.
All right, so that's the conclusion of this session. It's all we can relate
Now, for now, if anyone has any questions, I'll wait around, okay? And I'm going to let them go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Do you come to condos to get some?
Yes, yeah. Call me or Peter.